came from the Father and have come into the world. And now, I am leaving the world.
Jesus really cry on a rooftop? Is the Last Supper as poetic as The Chosen depicts it? These are questions that we have coming out of Season 5, Episode 1 of The Chosen, which is awesome. There's the triumphal entry. We get lots of really awesome Bible moments. And it's a great kickoff to this season, which is super intense, but also super incredible in the scenes that we get and the way The Chosen portrays these moments from the Bible that are just so iconic. So, today we're breaking down what is fact and what is fiction, what lines up with Scripture, and what is maybe added for, creative liberty.
We're going to break all of that down today in this video. Hello, my name is Eli Hollingsworth. Welcome back to Against the Current. And let's go ahead and roll.
So first up, we have the cold open of Season 5, which is the end of the Last Supper, if you've read the Bible. And this is, in fact. I mean, this is pulled directly from Scripture. And if you notice, Judas is already missing from this scene. He's already left to go collect his 30 pieces of silver and sell out Jesus. But this scene is pretty much pulled exactly from the Scriptures.
You said it plainly. No longer using figures of speech.
Said, now we understand this is why we believe, which is in John 16:29 through 30. And then when he says, let's close with a hymn, this is pulled directly from Matthew 26:30 and Mark 14:26. And Jesus praying is kind of a shortened version of John 17, the high priestly prayer. This scene is pretty much exactly how it plays out in the Scriptures. The Chosen really worked hard to make the Last Supper as epic and awesome as it can be by spreading it out amongst the cold open of every episode this season. So you're going to be able to see that as the episodes progress. We're going to actually go backwards. This is the end of the Last Supper, and the next episode is going to start a little earlier, and it's going to end right before the moment that we get at the beginning of this episode. So it's actually really cool the way that they structure the Last Supper, and I actually do really like the way they did this, and it's awesome, and it just kind of makes it more of a grand event that we spend the whole season, thinking and chewing on these incredible spiritual, lessons that we get from the Last Supper, and just, the Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples, the Passover meal. It's so significant, and it's the precursor to his arrest and his eventual crucifixion. Next up, let's talk about the triumphal entry. Of course, this is fact. This is all found in all four Gospels. It's found in Matthew 21, Mark 11, Luke 19, and John 12. Jesus enters Jerusalem on a donkey. People are waving palm branches, and they shout, Hosanna to the Son of David. Pharisees try to silence the crowd and try to stop the disciples to talk to them, as we see in the scene with The Chosen, Season 5, Episode 1. This is from Luke 19, 39 through 40. And Jesus says, quotes directly, if these were silent, these very stones would cry out. The Chosen does a very good portrayal of Jesus as he's kind of walking in Jerusalem here. Triumphal was an awesome scene. Now, obviously, we have this giant, extravagant rock guitar playing in the background, and we have these big cinematic, Hans Zimmer-y sounds in there, Christopher Nolan sounds. That really adds to this, the epicness of this moment, where it's almost kind of a contrast, where we get this kind of kick butt electric rock guitar playing in the background, and with music done by the great Matt Nelson and Dan Hazeltine as Jesus is coming in, and it's a kind of a juxtaposition to where Jesus is lowly coming in on a donkey, not on a big horse or with pomp and circumstance, but he rides in on a lowly donkey, fulfilling the Scriptures. And as we were left hanging on that cliffhanger from Season 4, the finale, now we finally see it here. And this scene was done pretty awesomely, and I think the music and the visuals and everything about it was just great, as they invited fans to come be a part of this scene. But as someone we watch here as Jesus is coming into Jerusalem, we get our first fiction of the episode. Now, there's obviously a bunch of little moments that are kind of fiction throughout The Chosen, maybe extra lines that they add in, but this character that we see here, who is the Watcher, as fans have noted, and we see him talking to Kaphni as well, the Watcher is fiction. Now, the way the Watcher is incorporated and the character that he is, he's not a fictional character, as we'll see later. He's a character from the Scriptures. But his importance and what he adds to Holy Week as an observer, and what he's going to kind of do later in the season, I won't spoil it, but that is in fact fiction, and we don't see that anywhere in the Scriptures. So we'll talk about that later, but the Watcher as a character is not someone who we get recorded being present in any of the four Gospels. writing this stuff down. Yeah, the Watcher is added in, and you'll learn who he is later, and we'll definitely discuss that.
Now my soul is troubled.
Now, when Jesus enters into the temple and begins preaching, and his soul is troubled, and we hear the voice of God, all of this scene is in fact. Jesus says, "Now my soul is troubled," which is pulled directly from John 12, verses 27 through 36. He prays, "Father, glorify your name," and a voice responds from heaven. Now, I saw this scene in IMAX in the movie theater, and it was pretty epic to hear the voice of God. I actually don't think I heard it when I watched it regularly at the premiere, which was just in, your average theater. And I was able to hear it in IMAX, and it was pretty epic. The sound design, everything is just very high quality this season. So it's really cool to see all of this stuff kind of, get its proper epic due here in Season 5, where they have the budget to make it as great as it can possibly be. And you hear the voice of God in that scene. It's just awesome. And the thunder, and some people are questioning whether or not they heard a voice or not, and it's just great the way they do it. Jesus preaches that a grain of wheat must die to bear fruit. And he says, "When I am lifted up, I will draw all people to myself." These are all quotes and scenes from the Gospel of John, and they've been completely faithfully brought to the screen here in The Chosen Season 5. Now, as you notice in this scene, John is talking to Mary, and they are both kind of starting to figure out what's maybe coming very, very soon, where Jesus might actually be serious about dying and being resurrected. So this is definitely, like a great scene, and as we're kind of getting more of John, realizing what's coming, all of his stuff in the Gospels is being portrayed accurately here, because the Gospel of John is very specific about a lot of things in Holy Week. So The Chosen portrays it as John kind of getting more interested in listening and starting to pay attention to what Jesus is saying.
Happy Caiaphas Day.
He needs me.
Next up, let's talk about Pilate, Caiaphas, and Atticus. This scene is in fact fiction. Now, this scene is fiction. We don't get this scene recorded in the Gospels, but it's all talking about real stuff that was a thing back then, where Caiaphas has to collect his temple guard clothing from the Romans. It was basically just a symbol of power, kind of lording it over the Jewish people during the Roman occupation, because the Romans would seize a nation or a country or a people, and they would occupy them. Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, was a idea they had where they would conquer a people, but they would still let them go about their little customs and traditions, and they wouldn't exactly kill them all. They would just occupy them, which was sometimes kind of even worse. And that's what they were doing with the Jewish people at this time, where Rome was just lording over the Jewish people, and they'd taken over their customs. And this is just The Chosen kind of embellishing that and portraying that here. And the way that Pilate talks to Caiaphas is very disrespectful. They don't like each other in the slightest. And Pilate, played by Andrew Allen here, he does a great job, and he's just great. But we also get Atticus here, who shows up as well. And we're kind of getting more of the political intrigue as to what went into crucifying Jesus. Were the leaders of the time, Pilate, Caiaphas, they were all in positions of power, and they all were in control, and they were the ones who orchestrated Jesus' crucifixion, which wasn't entirely legal, and there was a lot of political reasons behind Jesus' crucifixion, and The Chosen dives into all of that this season. So even though we get a lot of scenes like this, where the leaders are talking behind the scenes, they aren't exactly from Scripture. They aren't specific scenes that we get in Scripture. They are, what would have been happening, conversations that would have been had about this Jesus guy, this preacher who's causing so much trouble, and why Rome and the Jewish leaders wanted to put this guy to death. So, really interesting scene. They also mentioned they have 3 executions scheduled for Friday. This is kind of, referencing the thieves that are going to be crucified with Jesus. I think Pilate mentions that in this scene. So very cool. But I like this scene. It was awesome, but it is not found specifically in the Scriptures. Now, next up is not something recorded in the Scriptures, where The Chosen adds in this little plot line of Peter wanting to start preaching, wanting to practice giving a sermon to people.
You should write it down in your little book.
That would be redundant.
Or what?
Redundant.
Fiction, and he asks Matthew to record his words as he's trying to repeat Jesus' messages, and Matthew's like, nah, that's redundant. It's a great scene, and I think this is a great kind of plot line here, where Peter is trying to kind of come into his own as a preacher and a leader, and as he's Peter now, he's deciding that he's going to be the rock, and he's going to start preaching for people, and now he's trying to make his own sermons off of Jesus' message, and he fails horribly, but it's a great scene nonetheless where he's asking Matthew to help him, and I think this is a great plot line. It's not found in Scripture. We don't get Peter's first sermons and his first attempts at being a preacher, but The Chosen kind of fills that in creatively and imagines what that would have looked like, and it's super in Peter's character to act this way and to try to preach to people and be like, oh, I'm gonna be the guy. I'm gonna be like Jesus, and kind of failing.
Say the word, and I'll see to it that the rooms are prepared.
Now, next up, let's talk about Phoebe's house and Joanna's involvement and Tamara's involvement. These are all kind of fiction. We don't know where the disciples stayed for Passover week. All we know is that they went to the upper room to have the Passover meal together. We don't know where they stayed throughout the week. But The Chosen adds in that Joanna has this rich friend whose name is Phoebe, and that she's going to let the disciples stay there. She tells Tamara this, and they're all trying to set that up. Now, Phoebe is an important character who's mentioned in Romans 16:1 as a help to Paul. Someone actually asked Dallas about that on the live stream, and he kind of dodged the question. But I think if we're getting names that are, the exact same name as characters that we see later in Scripture, pretty likely that they're going to be the same person. Now, Phoebe could be the same Phoebe. I think she is, and maybe we'll see her in the Chosen's Acts show. But I think that's pretty much who this is. But they're staying in this rich friend's Phoebe's house, who's away for the weekend. I think that's cool. I think it's, where would the disciples have stayed? I don't know. Where would they hang out during these 5 days leading up to the crucifixion? It's probably in the friend's house, or Joanna supporting the ministry, or the other, aides that they had for people who were helping Jesus get his ministry to more people. This is probably one of those examples, and I think it's totally plausible. Like everything in the show, I don't think there's anything that's really not plausible. Next up, Jesus standing on the rooftop and weeping over Jerusalem. This is fact. We get Jesus weeping over Jerusalem in the Scriptures. It's found in places like Luke 19:41 through 44 and Matthew 23:37 through 39. His prediction that the enemies will set up barricades and the city will fall is actually him viewing the prophecy of Jerusalem's destruction in 70 AD. You actually see Jesus watch this unfold in kind of this, vision of the future. And this is a reference to, yes, the destruction of the Jewish temple in 70 AD. That's what we're viewing here with these Roman soldiers on fire and all that destruction. That's what that is referring to. I don't know if Jesus was on a rooftop, but we definitely get in the Scriptures multiple times of him saying, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, and watching the debauchery and greed in the temple and just being upset by it. Upset where the Jewish customs are being abused by the leaders and the sellers and the people, and it's just been degraded to a point that makes Jesus very upset, as we read in the Gospels. Not that the Jewish customs and a lot of the traditions that they had were wrong, it's just these ones were being abused by sinful people. So that scene is in fact straight from the Gospels. Now next up is Jesus crafting his whip. The way it's portrayed in The Chosen, kind of fiction, but bear with me here. In John 2:15, it says Jesus makes a whip of cords to cleanse the temple. In this scene, we actually see Jesus making the whip. He makes it out of the donkey bridle, which is not in Scripture, where he had this donkey bridle, if you don't remember, in Season 3, Episode 3, that was passed down since their ancestors left Jerusalem, and now it's been passed down to Jesus, and he uses this bridle to ride the donkey into Jerusalem, and then he takes cords off of it and fashions the whip to drive out the merchants from the temple. So we don't see Jesus crafting it the night before and then going into the temple the next day to take it down like we see in The Chosen, but it is actually in Scripture that Jesus fashioned a whip, and that was not something that took him 2 seconds and then he was off to the races to drive out the people. Although it is technically fiction, the scene in The Chosen, it's really not, because they're showing how it would have actually played out. Even though it's not specifically in Scripture, so it is kind of a fiction, but it's also kind of a fact. It's kind of in the middle. Episode 1 is great. Season 5 is amazing. It's a great start to a great season. I hope you enjoyed this little fact versus fiction. I'll probably be doing these for every episode this season. But man, this season is it's intense, it's emotional, and it's also incredibly powerful and great. Every episode is awesome. So can't wait for you to see the rest of it, those of you who haven't seen it. And make sure to check it out on Prime Video as it's dropping, in the next few weeks. Episodes are coming out quickly, so we're going to be talking about them for sure. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.